about the logo. So
And we should be live. I'm going to give it a few seconds, make sure that we are. And we'll wait just a minute before we get going. But if anyone's already here joining, say hello in the chat. It's always fun to see maybe even just where you're watching from. And we'll get going with some questions shortly. How's your week been going, Yujian?
it has been. Oh wait, we had Monday off. Yeah, so it's been a nice week so far. It's been Monday off.
Nice. I forgot. I did not have Monday off, so I forgot other people did.
Okay.
But I also just got back from like a long vacation, so I have a lot. I had a lot of work to catch up on. And yeah, we're going live everywhere. I see some people are already here. I'm sure more people will join in shortly. I'll go ahead and get going just with some housekeeping notes while people are joining in. Real quick, my name is Sage Elliott, and I'm the host for today's Robust and Responsible AI event. We're a community of AI and machine learning practitioners, researchers, designers, and much more. Basically, you can find people doing all sorts of things in the AI and ML field in our community. And if you want to kind of join in and talk with other people, there's a Slack channel that is in the link in the description that you can join and stay connected there and introduce yourself. You can think of this event kind of as a live podcast, is often how I describe it. I'll be interviewing guests starting with a specific topic. And then we should have some time maybe for questions at the end. And I always encourage as we go to, talk in the chat, even if we don't get to your questions or anything right away. It's fun to kind of see who else is here and maybe even stay connected with other people watching. And again, you can connect with each other in the Slack channel, which I definitely recommend. And if you'd like to come on for an event, I'm always looking for other guests. So if you have an interesting story to tell or something you're building, again, you can connect with me, and maybe you could be on the next live stream. And all right, so before we really get started with our topics today, today we have our guest, Yujian, and we're going to be talking about solving LLM data hurdles, specifically, I believe, with vector databases. I don't want to spoil it too much. But before we really start, get going, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Yujian? Let us know maybe an overview of your background and how you became. I think it's fun even just seeing how people became interested in like the data and ML field, and a little bit about what you're currently working on.
Okay. So I got interested in data, AI, ML really early on, like as like a teenager, um, and I had this like idea that AI is going to take over the world at some point, and I think it was like probably from watching like iRobot or something like that. And yeah, then I happened to also be good at computer science, and so I started out with interning like at IBM. And then I went and did some research on machine learning. In college, I did some segmentation research and some data fusion research, just to kind of like get into the field really. And then I went and worked at Amazon. I worked on the Auto ML system as a software developer. And then I left Amazon and I got into the world of startups and I started writing a ton of blogs. I was working on natural language processing mostly at this point. And I actually had my own like NLP API company that was like kind of like petering out as GPT was coming onto the scene, but really just got whacked in the face when GPT came onto the scene. And I was like, dang, really not prepared for that one. But then, now I'm a Zilliz. I learned about vector databases. I kind of like dug into them a little bit. I think that these are going to be a really, really important part of the new like AI LLM app stack. You pretty much like, I don't think anybody's doing anything with semantics, I guess, without using a vector database now.
Yeah, and I'm excited to dive more into vector databases and their use cases. Real quick, when you were a kid and you said you thought AI would take over the world, did you think that was going to be like in a bad way, or was that like tools like what we see right now?
No, I was thinking more like, okay, the singularity is going to happen one day. We're all going to get uploaded into this like this giant, computer.
Nice. Right. So we're going to be talking about, like you mentioned, I think vector databases and their use cases. And before we dive into that, let's kind of recap on maybe large language models or LLMs. Most people here are probably somewhat familiar with them by now. I feel like everyone is, even if you're not really in tech. But specifically you are. If you are, you've probably been using things like ChatGPT, etc. But maybe could you explain to the listeners maybe the basics of just like what a large language model is, and at a high level, how does it work?
Yeah. So large language models are, well, I mean, they're kind of like language models in general. So they they are these neural networks, and at a high level, what happens is you're basically okay. So I'm actually gonna backtrack, because usually when I explain this, I kind of backtrack a little bit to like 2012, when you think about like convolutional neural networks. These things give you local context, and then as you move forward, we got into what are they called? Self-attention, that gives you global context, and then eventually we got to this kind of like causal context with generative AI. And generative AI has actually been around for longer than the kind of like this idea of like the way we currently build things with the transformers and the encoders and the decoders. The idea of like this like causal attention allows you to generate text about the text that comes before. And so that's kind of what an LLM does, and it uses stochastic knowledge. So you give it a ton of data, and you're basically like, here's this data, learn the data, and then you ask it questions, and it just like takes the data and like comes up with some sort of response given the data. It doesn't like know what it's saying per se.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned, generative AI stuff has been around for quite some time, and LLMs and transformers specifically, the thing behind most LLMs, has really changed the I don't know how good they are basically. And like you mentioned, it's kind of like pattern matching, except for with LLMs and transformers, you have like attention, so it actually knows more of context of what it's answering and what it previously generated. Where a lot of text before was pattern matching, and it would say stuff and it was cool, but it wasn't as impressive as like what we see right now with the ChatGPT, etc. All right, and then sticking on large language models for a second, what are some of the practical applications that you've seen that you find particularly exciting right now, or
Yeah,
that you think will be like transformative?
yeah. So I actually think that like these LLMs are like really impressive with like what they can do for code, and what they can do for like, I think like the most like practical business application could probably be like AI chatbots for call centers. Like really, if you have all of your knowledge documents in one place, and you can kind of query that semantically, then you can really basically answer almost all customer service questions. You'd obviously still have to have some people in the loop, but I think that's like a really like that's going to transform that industry entirely. And then I think the coding is wild. Just that you can use these LLMs to come up with nice code based on documentation. Um, it could save you a lot of time.
Yeah, do you currently use like Copilot or anything for programming, even if it's just on like side projects?
I actually use OSS chat, which is like something that Zilliz built internally. It's like but it's like it's open source. It's like open to the public, and what it allows you to do is it chats with open source software. So I actually use that when I'm like messing around with PyTorch, like I just did last week, right? I literally just spent a week doing image editing in PyTorch, and so I use like OSS chat to kind of like chat with PyTorch.
That's awesome. And so that's a tool that people can go look at right now and play with.
Yeah,
OSS Chat by
yeah,
Zilliz.
it's osschat.io, and you can just like talk to these open source libraries.
That's awesome. I'm gonna go look at that. And I love I like how you described it, like you're talking to the library itself.
Yeah,
Like, hey PyTorch, I'm trying to do this. Can you help me? And it's like, oh yeah, like
yeah, exactly. You're just like, okay, like that's how you learn from the library, right? You go read the documentation, or you read tutorials and you read some documentation. It's kind of like you're cutting this out, you're getting the tutorial and the documentation.
from the library itself. I love that idea. Like the
Yeah,
library is alive now, and it's helping you build stuff with
exactly.
it. And I'll just mention real quick before the next question, I saw a chunk of people join in live, and feel free to say hello in the chat if you just want to say hello and maybe where you're watching from. It's kind of fun to see where everyone's tuning in from. All right. So I think those are really cool use cases, ones I'm excited about as well. And yeah, even like chatbots right now, I feel like everyone has probably not everyone, but when I go to sites now, it feels like everyone's put a chatbot on there that didn't have one previously. That seems like it's powered probably by like ChatGPT, etc. And it's really cool. Great way of interacting and asking questions. All right. So could you explain the concept of vector databases and maybe a little bit about why they're important in the context of machine learning and AI?
Yeah. So I'm just gonna start by explaining what vectors are. So basically, if you have a neural network model, the second to last layer has the output from the second to last layer is the numerical representation, is the model's numerical representation of whatever data you input. And so vectors are basically this output. Um, and vector databases are a way to store, index, and query this representation, this numerical representation of your data. So there's like some things like vector search libraries. Like for example, HNSW is a very popular vector search library, or Annoy by Spotify, or Faced from Facebook, the Facebook AI similarity search library. And HNSW stands for Hierarchical Navigable Small Worlds. It's kind of hard to say. These libraries allow you to do much of the indexing and the searching with vectors. But when you want to build on top of that, when you want to move towards more of a production level, enterprise level like product, then you need something like a vector database that can scale. So on top of the vector indices, you need things like scaling, like how many pods are you going to spin up? Are you using Kubernetes? Are you using some other system? Like how many instances are you going to spin up? When do you spin them up? And like how big do they need to be? And other kinds of like production level things like this. Like, do you need backups? Do you need role-based access control? A bunch of things like that. That's probably when you really want to go to the vector databases. But if you just start building like these small projects, it's actually totally fine to just use a vector index. And then you can go use a vector database to learn about, how do I use a vector database if I ever need to build this in production?
Yeah. So what's the biggest difference from like a vector database between a vector database and like a traditional database, maybe like Postgres or something? Like, why should someone think about using like Milvus versus like a Postgres database? Maybe is a good way to phrase the question.
Yes, that is actually, yes, this is a great question because I just talked to someone about this today, so I should have remembered this. So databases, like traditionally when we think about databases, we're like, oh, key value databases. There's these tables, we're going to do these joins, we're going to have these normalized, whatever. Or like, NoSQL, like key blob, like, here's some JSON data. Vector databases work differently because you're not like querying for like a key. There are keys in the vector database still, and there's like metadata. Like Milvus can store metadata along with your vector data. But vector databases work differently because what you're doing is you're actually giving it the vector and saying, find me the closest data point.
Right. And I think maybe a good way of thinking about a vector too is, for me, I think of images become a vector when you kind of import them into PyTorch, right? So like if anyone's ever done that and you worked with it, you've probably seen this at least like 3D array of RGB values that represents your image, but now it's a vector, and you could, in theory, take that vector and say search for similar vectors in a vector database, and it would pull in a nearest data point, right? So like a similarity search between images, but just using the vector values.
Right, exactly. The similarity search between the images with the vector database. I mean, I created like a notebook about this very recently. It does almost like the exact same thing. It basically says, here's my ResNet 50 representation of this image, store it in the vector. And then when you come and you say, find me a similar image, it says, okay, we're going to take your image and we're going to run it through ResNet 50, except for the last layer. And then we're going to see what the closest vector representation is. And it just basically does, some math to compare the.
Yeah. Awesome. And I know we mentioned Milvus, but we didn't really explain what it is. Do you want to give a quick little pitch about that?
Yes. Milvus is an open source vector database. And I'm wearing my Milvus hoodie right now. It's like this is supposed to be a bird. It looks like an eye to me, but it's supposed to be a bird. Milvus is a bird. It's a small to medium sized bird of prey. So yes, that's yes. Milos is a vector database. It's an open source vector database. It's built for enterprise scale. Milvus has like these I wish I had an architecture diagram, but it's got these like cool indexes that kind of like spin up, and there's like 3 of them instead of you putting them all in one. So you have like a query one, a data one, and an indexing one. Oh, sorry, did I say indexes? I meant nodes. Nodes, like pods, like in Kubernetes. These nodes spin up and they all perform different functions for what you need to do with the vector database. So the query node performs the functions that you need to do with queries. The data one kind of handles the data that needs to pass through, and the indexing one does the indexing. And also Milvus has like a unique way of storing the data by putting everything into these 512 megabyte chunks and allowing you to kind of like query this data in parallel, this is really what makes Milvus like good at scale, is because usually at scale you're working with like 50 gigabytes, 100 gigabytes. Then you really only want to be querying 512 megabytes at a time instead of like 100 gigabytes, because it's just going to be a lot faster.
That makes sense. Very cool. All right. So how does the vector database, or how can it enhance the performance and efficiency of machine learning models, or specifically, we're talking about large language models here?
Right. So LLMs. Let's talk about for a moment like what are the actual data problems that LLMs have. Right. That would make sense. So number one, like you may be calling your LLM too often for the same thing. So for example, if you have an internal chatbot or an external chatbot, and people, you don't have this data stored somewhere, or you have it stored in your knowledge base, but maybe it's not like stored in the right form, or maybe you just don't have it stored somewhere. People come and they keep asking a question that goes directly to your LLM. That's a case where you probably want to just cache that answer. And alternatively, maybe you have something where, you have the same answer that applies for like a week, but then next week it doesn't. You might want to cache the answer and then later delete that entry. But this is like one way of using a vector database is to cache these answers. But the problem there is that you're running up your costs by frequently calling the LLM for the same thing. The other problems with LLMs are basically around domain knowledge and up-to-date knowledge. So if you have private data that OpenAI the ChatGPT wasn't trained on, then it's not going to know. And if you want to use an LLM for your private internal data, then you probably want to have ChatGPT know that, or GPT model, the LLM that you're using, have access to that information. And so you have a couple solutions there. One is fine tuning, and the other is using a vector database. And then the other case of having up-to-date knowledge is just saying, GPT-4 was, I think all of the GPTs were trained, the cutoff date they were trained on was September of 2021. So they don't know anything that's happened in 2022 or 2023. And for example, if you go to ChatGPT and you tell me like, how do I use a conversation? And you ask it like, how do I use a conversation chain in LangChain? It's not going to know. But, then if you go to like OSS chat and you ask, how do I use conversation chain in LangChain? This is actually how I implemented my first conversation chain in LangChain.
That's awesome. So, someone asked, does vector database help with fine tuning? I think in this case, you're splitting out fine tuning versus using a vector database.
Yes. So I was just gonna comment on that. Fine tuning and using a vector database aren't necessarily like exclusive, but they generally solve the same problem, and it's up to you kind of how you want to use them, and perhaps you could use them in parallel. So for example, maybe you want to fine tune your LLM on finance data and then use a vector database to inject your own personal data into that when you're asking it questions, because maybe you want to make your fine-tuned LLM available to other people, kind of like maybe like Bloomberg, right? Like the main difference that I would kind of like say, the main advantage of using a vector database over fine-tuning things is just that you only have to update the database, and then you can just let someone else worry about the LLM entirely. So it kind of abstracts out the idea of having to deal with the machine learning model. It's also like fine tuning is generally more expensive, but it can have like there are cases where it could be better. I don't know of any, but I'm sure that those cases exist. And so the way that vector databases, kind of help solve these problems is by acting as like a data store to allow you to inject data on top of your LLM in your apps.
That's awesome. And a lot of times, you don't have access to certain models to fine tune as well, like GPT, et cetera, all these big models that are hosted somewhere. I can't go take that and fine tune it. But if I can use a vector database as a data store and get similar or results, then that's a great solution.
Exactly.
All right. So this will actually be good, I think, to maybe tie in. Do you have like a real world use case or example that you've seen vector databases employed in projects? And it could even just be a project you've worked on, or maybe something you've seen someone use Milvus that's just like a really cool use case you'd love to shout out.
Yeah. Actually, you guys should all go check out papergpt.bio. This is a project made by someone who's, guess what, local to Seattle. Actually, he's a little bit far north, but he's in the Seattle area. So to everybody who lives outside of Washington State, he lives in Seattle. This guy uses Zilliz to create a chatbot for these bio papers, biomed papers. He's in the biomed industry, and he was like, yeah, so I saw that these vector databases were a thing, and I wanted to check it out, and it looks really cool. Where would I drop the link to this?
I just put it in the chat, actually. So if anyone is watching on YouTube, they can click on that link and check it out.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. When I first saw it, I was like, wow, nice. Okay, it's cool to see that people in many domains are using this technology.
And they're using this in the way probably, well, I don't know if you know what the model is on the back end, but are they using this in the way we talked about, kind of instead of fine tuning, they're using like a vector database to store that knowledge that they want to share?
Exactly. They're using what we call the CVP framework, which uses ChatGPT, a vector database, and prompt as code as P. But he's using this kind of like, he's using GPT-4 or GPT 3.5. I'm actually not entirely sure. He's using one of the GPTs on the back end, and then he's calling the vector database to store all of the information about the papers that he adds, and then puts that and then queries that database himself, or queries the database from the front end, basically.
Right. That's awesome. All right. Could you tell us? I know we're getting kind of close to our half-hour mark as well that we keep the streams often to. We can totally go longer anyway, but could you tell us a little bit about the work you're currently doing at Zilliz? I know we've mentioned Milvus and stuff several times, which is, I believe, maintained by Zilliz. But could you tell us a little bit more about what you're working on and how you're making this easier, all the stuff we talked about for everyone?
Yeah, so I'm personally not doing anything crazy in the software dimension. I'm basically I'm like a power user of Milvus. I use it to build a bunch of things. So I find out like when there's issues generally early on. So for example, sometimes there's compatibility issues between versions, and you have to you're like, hey, this is an issue. And then sometimes they're like, actually, that's built in. Like we updated a bunch of things, and they're not supposed to be compatible. We force you to upgrade, blah blah blah. And it's like, okay, cool. But I use Milvus a lot. I use it to build things like I just built like a multi-document Q&A engine a couple weeks ago. It's really useful with Llama Index and LangChain. I built the reverse image search app. I just spent the last almost 2 weeks building this fashion app because there's just so many. Actually, because most of it was just dealing with segmentations. This has nothing to do with vector databases. It's literally just how do I even get this model to segment correctly? It's just dealing with types and just things like that are just very, very basic, very rudimentary things to deal with in your programming. So, but you can use the vector database to kind of compare what people are wearing, right? Do you wear a lot of black hoodies or things like that? And so actually I created one that allows you to compare yourself to some famous celebrities, so you can find which ones that you look most like, that you dress most like, not that you look most like. So this is something that I've created with vector databases recently. What else have I done? I do a lot of events. I host a lot of events in Seattle.
Any events coming up soon that you want to shout out?
I wish I had an events shout out, but I don't have one exactly on the calendar yet.
It's good to take a break sometimes.
It
But
is.
I see you at events all the time. That's how we know each other. For anyone
Exactly.
watching, we're both in Seattle, and I'm really excited to have Yujian here. We always run into each other at events, and it's just been awesome talking with you every time. So really
Yeah.
excited that you got to come in here and share about Zilliz. Outside of the things you're specifically working on at Zilliz, kind of maybe do you want to give us a little bit of overview of some of the stuff Zilliz is creating or that they offer right now that people might be
Yeah.
interested in?
Yeah. So obviously Milvis is our thing, the vector database, right? We've also created this thing called GPT Cache, which is a plugin to GPT that allows you to cache your GPT results. Zilliz Cloud has gotten some updates recently, and it's been really great. So people in the Milvis Slack channel will ask me things like, is there role-based access control? Can I put my schema in JSON? Is there dynamic schema? How do I do like the scaling, etc. stuff? And I'm like, oh, well, guess what? Now we have role-based access control in the cloud. Now we have the dynamic schema, which I think is also on the cloud. I know it's in Milvis. I think it's also in Zilliz. And we have like the backup stuff. So Zilliz is also adding in a new index soon. Actually, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to talk about this, but we are adding in a new indexing thing soon. That's going to be really cool. I'm sure we'll release some announcement about it because it's going to go open source in a bit. So we're working on making vector databases faster, better, stronger, not harder, easier.
Yeah, you're skipping out that thing. Faster, better, stronger, though, for sure.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Yeah, I want to go and play around with it, just like doing some of the things like you were talking about. Building in like that layer to a GPT model sounds super interesting, and like it sounds way easier than trying to fine tune something most of the time.
Yes. Fine tuning is actually pretty tough.
Yeah. Like I know some people that do large language modeling in the medical industry, and so like they're trying to do a lot of fine tuning around that. And now I'm thinking maybe there's a good way of taking an existing model and building in a vector database layer.
Exactly.
Are there any current advancements in the field of kind of data or machine learning or artificial intelligence that you're particularly excited about that isn't just vector databases?
I will say I've seen some pretty cool papers around LLMs recently. There's one called QLoRa, I think, that talks about how you can like quantize your bits down to, I think it's 4-bit. They can do 4-bit quantization and get similar level results as your LLM. So now you can take a lot less memory with your LLM, right? Which is really, really important as we kind of like move towards this productionization of LLMs, because they're just so expensive. They're just like ridiculously expensive to run. Like inference and training, OpenAI has spent hundreds of millions of dollars building these things, right? What else is cool? There's this thing called RKWV, RWKV. RWKV is like this like small kind of like language model that it's an RNN. It's not transformer based. It's just like RNN based that is meant to run on your phone. So that's pretty cool. And it's shown levels of performance similar to maybe like GPT-3 or slightly under like GPT-3. So that's also really cool. That's going to be less processing power. That's mostly the cool kind of like things that I see are things like that.
Man, a non-transformer based model is so archaic.
Actually, my manager at Zilliz, Frank, has this interesting idea about computer vision, which I probably I'm not going to give away too much of what he's going to, because he's going to talk about it at some point. So I'm not going to give too much of it away, but there's a teaser. He's got this interesting neural network model coming up for computer vision.
Well, now I'm excited, and I can't wait to see it. I love computer vision stuff. For anyone who doesn't know, so that's now I'm really excited to see what he's working on.
Me too. Me too.
And yeah, I like the idea. Like seeing all these things get smaller and more efficient to run is awesome, and we'll see them used in so many more applications. Like you mentioned, being able to run on a phone, getting GPT like performance right off a phone's chip is awesome versus like having to query the cloud or anything like that. So you can have a chatbot offline essentially. Yeah, so I think that's really exciting, and like that was something really exciting around computer vision, for a while too. Was like just condensing these models, and now they're able to run on, like ES32 chips and stuff like that. So like your coffee maker can have like a camera that that could do something if you wanted.
Your cup is full, and then
Yeah, or like I don't know exactly what they do, but I've been seeing computer vision more and more and stuff. They probably keep track of what pods you're using if you're using like a Keurig type thing or something like that, and I bet there's a way of them know, like if they know who has that coffee maker, and it's like, hey, we can just ship you those pods directly. We know you've drank like 5 out of 10. Like you're gonna want more soon. Try it out. Yeah. Before we wrap up, so we're at our 30 minutes, I know. Is there anything else you want to share about your work in general at Zilliz, or any upcoming things you want to give a shout out before we wrap up the stream?
Let's see. I'm judging a hackathon this weekend. If you're in Seattle, well, it's probably a little too late for that. I'm judging a hackathon in July. If you're in Seattle, check out Future Builders Hackathon.
That is the one I might go be at as well. So I need to follow up, but I also might be giving a talk there. So
okay. Yes. I also have I don't know if I'm giving a talk there yet. But yeah, so that's a hackathon I'll be at. And then AI Camp is hosting a hackathon towards the end of July. It's currently set for the 28th, but I'm really pushing to put it on the 29th because the 28th is a Friday. And then I will be hosting a large meetup style conference in the Seattle area that is totally going to be worth flying into if you're watching. And it's going to be hosted with Databricks, and we're going to be hosting it probably at the Bellevue Art Museum, but it's going to be at a museum. It's going to be late August, early September. It's 100% going to be worth flying into. It's going to be an all-day thing.
Do you know what that's called, or where people can find
info?
No
name. We have no dates, but I guarantee you it's going to be good.
That sounds awesome to me. I'm sold. So I'll probably be there too. Thank you. That all sounds really exciting, and I'm really excited. I know you are. I know most people are really excited about in-person stuff happening again. So yeah, if people are in Seattle, check out meetup.com if you haven't in a while. There's a lot more stuff than there was a year ago. So it's really exciting to see people in person again and have those like side conversations and stuff that you just can't really in a virtual setting. With that, though, I think we can wrap up our stream. Thank you so much for coming on. This is really cool, really insightful for me, I know, and probably a lot of other people who have been hearing about vector databases, but maybe haven't actually heard like concrete use cases and how they're used. And I hope that people will go check out, Milos now and Zilliz and do some of the cool things we've talked about.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. If you're building any LLM apps, I highly recommend checking out Milos. It makes vector search super easy.
Awesome. Yeah. And if anyone wants to stay connected, all the links to Yujian for all of your like socials and Medium and stuff are in the YouTube description as well. So you can go there, give them a follow there. And yeah, what's the best way to reach out to you if people have any questions? Is that LinkedIn or like a Zilliz Slack channel?
Oh yeah, ping me on LinkedIn. I mean, yeah, there's a Milos Slack channel. Can I just actually I don't know where it's at.
I can always update the description later as well. But yeah, I'm sure people can find it if you go to Milos Project or whatever. I'm sure it's a link somewhere. But yeah, LinkedIn is usually good for most people as well. So I know you're active on there and you're pretty responsive to messages.
Yep, I'm active on LinkedIn. I'm active on Slack.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here again, and I will wrap up the stream. We're going to hit end now, and thank you everyone for tuning in and asking questions. And if you want to stay connected with the R Squared or Robust and Responsible AI community, again, there's a Slack channel there you can also connect and ask questions at. So thank you again. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, and then there's the awkward pause where it's like a minute where it's turning off.